Welcome to this meeting of the South Burlington School Board. The next item on our agenda is comments from the public regarding items that are not otherwise on our agenda. If the item is already on the agenda, wait till we get there. Otherwise, please go ahead. I don't see any. Okay.
We probably want to do
And we're going to skip over item 4 because there is a meeting taking place this evening relating to the Howard Center's permit application for the methadone clinic, and we expect our counsel who is attending that meeting to come here and report to us directly. So we'll wait for him to do that. And that takes us to the superintendent's report. David?
So on my report is an update on crisis planning, and I just wanted to, talk with the board a little bit about, and the community, take some feedback around our planning. Again, I think the unfortunate events that have taken place in Connecticut and other schools have led to make me think more deeply about where we are as a school district and how we ensure the safety of our school community, our students, our staff, all that are within our system. So currently, we remain in restricted access for this week. I've put that on just to be really clear with parents that we've remained in restricted access. I talked next about developing an assessment scale that helps us to understand a little bit more about what might be the concerns in our community. I'm working on that with the administrators, along with what we do in the future, or whether we stay under restricted access. Again, looking and communicating with them around how we would do that. In addition to that thinking, I want people to really make sure that they understand that we do have crisis planning teams that are involved, and we're looking at installing, or what the cost would be around to install buzzer switches in our schools, as well as the ability to actually see the individual. So it'd be some video at the door entry so that you could at least be seen and buzzed in after you know that so-and-so is coming for an appointment or needing to come in. So we're looking at that as well. Again, I think these other pieces are, measures that we want to have happen. Our crisis teams making sure that our staff and students are aware of the crisis plans and commands that need to happen in the event that there is something that is happening in our school or in our community that we can quickly respond to. And then this Present 3, which I know people have heard us talk about, but inside our schools, in 2 locations inside the school at the high school, and 2 locations at the middle school, and 2 at each of the elementary schools, there's Present 3 devices, which allows us to present our ID cards, any staff member, 3 times, in kind of quick 3-second intervals that then locks the front doors down. There's been some concern on whether or not that's quick to respond, so this is the week we're needing to test those to say, what is the delay? If it's, as you can imagine, if it's more than, I'm going to say, a 10-second delay, then that's too long. So we're testing that system out. But important for me to come up with a plan that's going to make sense, that's going to continue to have trust in our community and safety for our kids in the most respectful, appropriate way. So we're working on that. I don't have any really definitive next steps. I will be working throughout the remainder of this week to communicate, number one, with you, the board, and with the community around how we continue to move forward as a educational institution. Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, currently the public access to the library is a bit awkward. Is there any thought given to what can be done about that in this context?
We've been in restricted access, so our doors have been, monitored, and we expect that will be the place, the same mode that the community library is in as well. And I understand that that's not been happening this week, or at least today anyway.
Not today, anyway.
So I actually have a meeting with the city folks this week. I think it's Thursday or Friday. And we'll be talking about how to do that. But we expect that it should not make people have to walk far distances to get into the community library. And that's what I understood happened today, and that's not our interest. So again, it's a really touchy situation, the community library. If those doors are wide open, then anyone can come through there and essentially get into our high school. So it's important that they have the same protocols and procedures in place that we do at the high school. And so that's been the way in which we've chosen to work on that.
Kathy?
Wondering if you can't lock it's ridiculous to have the front door of the library locked. In no way does that work at all, but I understand the situation, so I'm wondering, couldn't you deal with the door to the high school instead? I know students come into the library, but couldn't you work on the door to the high school instead of having to deal with locking that front door to the library?
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. You mean the door between the library and the high school
Right.
corridor?
Right. If there's a focus, David, I really feel like it should be there and not at the main entrance. We can't be living in jails.
But our students are in the
I
library,
understand,
so
but that's the decision that the town,
But we're still responsible for
we just,
students.
there needs to be a separation, and
Well, again, Kathy, I think this, whether it's community library or schools, it's in my job on, work for the board and for the community to try to figure out, what I think makes the most sense, for 2013 forward, that allows staff to teach, community to visit, students to be educated, all of those things to work in concert
I know
in the
it's
most
tricky.
effective way. And so, this may be the response here and now, or in the near future, may change into the future. But again, I want to make sure that, number one, education can happen in the most effective way. And if you're a teacher or a community member and you are, really uneasy, then you're not going to be as effective as you could be if you're worrying about safety. So how can I make sure that that's mitigated to the best possible level we can? It wasn't that long ago when we activated these, and a lot of staff, we shouldn't have to do that. You're right, we shouldn't. But different times, different places, and it's actually worked out quite well for our staff. So we're gonna have to reevaluate it, and I will come back to the board with kind of the next steps, and really try to be thoughtful about how we do this and not reactive, because there's a whole lot of other things that are at play.
Other comments? Any comments from the board? Okay. That takes us to the school board budget line. And we have an update on the board budget. I don't know, David, is there anything you want to say by way of introducing this issue?
I think obviously it's your budget.
Yep.
We've had some conversations in the past about this. We had dialogue, and so you had some recommendations, and I want to be sensitive to, how solidified those were. So they're on the left side, looking at some of the things that the recommendations, and then on the right side are some of the feedback that I have in the plan here as far as the budget as it's outlined in some of the information connected to it. So again, I think just helping me to understand where you want to go with this. Obviously, there's some things that I feel like we need to have the money there to support the different needs that the district has under your budget.
Well, comments? Diane?
I have a question. A few meetings ago, we talked a little bit about the media and media consulting and getting the message out, and I just kind of wondered where that would fall within the board budget. Which of these items? Would that be under advertising and marketing, or do we have something in our budget that would include that kind of resource? if we wanted to use that type of resource?
I mean, typically what we've had in the past is we've had, money to do the copying for the budget book. We've, had a variety under advertising, marketing, or postage, and things of that nature. We've had money there. I would say if it's a position in the district to do that service, that's different than, just the work that you do around the work that the board wants to do to make sure that the budget communication happens. That's kind of where I see the advertising and marketing information, as opposed to, more district level initiatives around telling our story around year-round type of things.
Well, and I'm actually thinking about the budget piece, and at the
Yep.
school board's meeting, there was a presentation on how to get your message out
Yep.
as a board about your budget or whatever needs to kind of be communicated well to the public.
Yep.
And I wondered if we ever wanted to use that service, would it come under the board budget, or is there another place in the budget, or have we not really put that anywhere?
Some of it's a learned skill that we're, again, part of our social networking discussion that we did in collaboration with Burlington was try to unleash some of that around how, what are skills that we have and we can become better at to make that happen. Some of that's within all of us around a uniform plan on putting that out. There's obviously some skill sets if we're going to go and time variables that need to be considered if we're going to go, into a major category of, trying to market, the things that we do. But I mean, I guess what I would say is that we're in the infancy. We have some things that we know we can do to get out our message around budget once we solidify where we're at. Which would help us to figure out what we then need in the future, whether it be just us or it be more collaborative with other schools, around how we might share a resource or share some of those services. So, I don't know, Wynn, do you have anything to add, around the marketing or social media piece?
Well, we're working on a kind of a strategic process by which to move the information out, social media being one of those. And another option that we have that we're considering is dividing up the city in different quadrants or different segments and having different individuals go out and kind of be champions, and I say it being champions of communication to be able to get the message out. So there's a couple of ways we can go with that. But there's some real opportunities with social media right now, through Twitter, through Facebook, to be able to get that message out in a way that people are paying attention to it and receiving it.
But as far as the direct question Diane's asked about other budget lines, my impression is there have been times in the almost 12 years I've been doing this when we have taken money from some other location in the budget to do some specific communication, but there is no place I know of in the budget where there's a chunk of money for that purpose. And it would ideally be here.
Okay.
We have drawn on contingency funds from time to time.
I think your focus can be up in this, the upper right-hand corner, where you've, purchased services. Obviously there's some recommendations in here based on some of our desired communication outreach with, our partners of our ETN, for instance. So, there's some things that are factored into your budget, communicated that we've had. And again, we tried to capture these. And, all the way down to number 6, the board stipend or the Ted Manazur, foregoing that for the year. But again, these are at your discretion. And with notes on the bottom.
Postage line item is reduced by $1,000,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't look like we've been drawing on the postage line items in the past. That's come out of the superintendent's budget, essentially.
Well, that's right, and a lot more of our postage has been happening more electronically as well.
Yeah.
And including the budget book still goes out to all of our citizens, but we've cut that back, the number of copies that we've done in the past, because we do have it online, which that wasn't an option, several years ago now. So we've made those changes.
Well, let me just make one larger comment on that, and that is, this is a small amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small enough amount of money so that in a $42 million budget, one could just say, well, we're gonna ignore it. Or we're gonna let it rest exactly where it is. I think the question is really symbolic. It's whether in a year in which our budget for the district is gonna be difficult, we should find a way to tighten our own individual belts. Or, not really our own individual belts, our own official belts, I guess, would be the more appropriate way to put it. And in part, I'm not inclined to do that because the board needs to function effectively. But if there are some ways to do that don't damage that, I gotta think about it. I mean, I'll throw something out. You know, is the School Boards Association something we have to do? We don't have to do that. We've done it. It's been, I think, particularly useful for training for our new board members. It's been good for networking. Is this a year when we can't afford to spend that money? I mean, those are the kinds of questions I guess this budget brings up. And of course, obviously, our own stipends are an issue as well. And I'll just add a little history on that. I've been a proponent in the past of increasing the stipend because I felt it was very inappropriate that some members of our community who might want to serve really couldn't afford to serve. They couldn't, there were people I talked to over the years when trying to recruit candidates who said, where am I going to get the babysitting? How am I going to show up at all these meetings? I have kids to take care of. So from my perspective, that's an important issue, although $500 is a small enough matter so that if I take that hat off, I can say to myself, I don't need to get paid $500 to do this. So we have some things we could change. The reality is $25,000 is such a small part of $42 million that it doesn't have impact, I don't think, beyond the symbolic. But from a symbolic perspective, do we need to do some things? That's the question, I think.
I really like the affiliation with the School Boards
I do too.
Association. I think even though, we've, current members have served at least 2 years, I feel like there's ongoing things that are happening at the legislature. There are things happening around the community. That's how we keep up to date. And so I just really appreciate that affiliation to know what's happening in Vermont and education. And those are our peers around the state. And I just feel like I need to be connected. That's my perspective on that piece.
Too important.
Yeah, I think it's important as well.
Okay. Well, I won't argue with you. I agree with it, but I just thought it was a question that we should face directly. Stipends?
I would probably propose one of two alternatives, and one would be to, and this is a difficult conversation because I think I think there are circumstances where we want to encourage anybody in the public to run for an open board seat. But on the other hand, I do think it's a symbolic gesture to say we're going to be going to the community with a pretty significant increase, and I think to forego the stipend for this year might send a message that at least this board is willing to serve this particular year without that stipend. Another alternative might be to allocate the stipend to some of the activities Diane was talking about, all or part of the stipend to improve communication. The budget's essentially flat. It's less than 0.7% increase over last year's budget. But that message might be a combination of the board forgoes the stipend, but also invests a modest amount in improving communication through a variety of means, in part because I think we're going to need to do that in particular with this budget. But I know that's been, always been this board's effort to improve communication. So that's maybe two alternatives there. One is just forgo the stipend altogether, or allocate part or all of it to some of these communication vehicles.
Interesting suggestion.
So David, I have a question about the advertising. When we go to the other paper and places like that to talk about the budget with the community, where does that come from if it doesn't come from this advertising line item?
Well, we have other lines as well,
Yeah.
in the district, but typically if it's specific to, budget and school board communication, if you wanted to take out a page, we've done some things like that in the past, and that's where that would come out of. So again, where we have to buy inserts or things like that, that's where this has come out of in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, there's a little gray area here, I would say, between sometimes it's general school business and then there's kind of school board budget related communication pieces. I don't know, John, anything to add to that?
Well, it does come from advertising, but there's also purchase services that have been moved around a little bit. That's mostly where it came from. And some miscellaneous services.
Could we manage for this budget year to go without paper and just, we're all at this point receiving information electronically, just receive it?
There's some level of efficiency for you on that because, we have done less printing in the past. We don't have as many for the public, and we've tried to be smarter about that.
Because we would really need
I just
still
worry.
to print things for the
Yeah,
public.
ideally, and Delina, we're working
Yeah.
on, we do have one iPad, it's a, board, and we're kind of trying to see if all of the things can happen, and over time, to do the cost benefit analysis, say, can we go paperless, in the year, where then you have, an iPad that gets assigned to you, so that you can bring it to board meetings and have it. Some of it's just trying to make sure you can read everything you need to read, so you don't then need to bring another piece of paper. So we're wanting to be smart about that. I have seen where some boards have done that, but yet they still have the same
Paper
stuff
for
with
it.
them. So I'm and Delina's working through that to look at, how that can work. And so eventually, I'd like to see us go that way. I don't see there's a lot benefit right now until we get that up and running.
Well, are there any other comments, thoughts, suggestions? Does anyone want to take up any of the suggestions that have been made, make a motion to change the board budget in any way?
No, I'll make a motion that we, for the budget year FY14, that the board forego its stipend. And I don't know if I should add a recommendation to maybe allocate even $1,000 of that toward improving communication through other media.
Second.
As with or without the $1,000?
I'll keep it with.
All right. Is any discussion? It's not very much money, but I would say this, it's probably the right symbol. Any further discussion? Without any discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
So the budget as printed will be approved, although the allocation of resources would be.
Well, I think with the budget
Right.
go down $1,000, and $1,000 will be added
to
the communication
Gotcha.
line item.
They'll be
Okay.
going down to $1,500.
1,500.
In total.
Right.
That's right. That's right. Anything else? So with that, if there's no objection, as amended, the board budget be approved. Without objection, it's approved. Thank you. It's a small sacrifice for us, and the right symbol to say to the community, this is
Working
just a
hard.
really tough year, and we're gonna have to, this will be the easiest of the tough choices we have to make. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So with that, we go to item 7, the tuition rate for 2014. And David, I think it'd be helpful, not just for the board, but for the public, for you to just give the background on this.
So every year, at this time of the year, we have to come out with our announced tuition rate for the upcoming year. And the provisions are in the law where it allows us to then come out with our allowable rate, because we set it based on our what we believe to be our budget, and the budget determines, that rate for our tuition amount. So obviously, we're having to make some guesses here around where we'll be in our budget, which is a determining factor in the metric used to determine the allowable tuition, or announced tuition rate. So we've done that and given you some information here, probably far more than you might like, around some past years and other comparables to other schools. We are, very fortunate to be able to have students come to us from other locations, and when they do, from the islands and from Georgia, particularly, they pay this tuition rate. So it's important for us to be, transparent, as we have to by law, but we also have been mindful, the board has been in the past, around trying to really set a rate that's has some, an understanding of the issues that they also have in their budget planning. So what you have in front of you is information around other schools. Highlighted in yellow is our preliminary budget, which was the status quo budget, option 1. And obviously, I've also given you the 7-cent and the no split vote amount and what the corresponding rate would be. On the next sheet is the draft for discussion, which, cites the title and the section of the law that requires us to do that. And I'm giving you some, recommendation. Obviously, you can do what you wish around where you want to set this. Important factor in our continued services, primarily at the high school. We really don't have many that come to us in the elementary. So with that said, I'll be quiet and answer any questions that you might have around this.
I'm a little confused by some of the numbers of other districts that are shown on the chart, because if I would have thought that the allowable tuition rate was the highest rate you could charge, but the announced rates sometimes are higher. What am I misunderstanding?
For instance, well, again, what could come out as announced is a factor of your budget, which could be higher than what then gets approved, which then is factored into your allowable. So you actually, in some cases, schools do have to give a credit back.
So I'm looking at Burlington.
Yep.
For 2011,
Mm-hmm.
it says that their announced tuition rate was $15,833, but their allowable rate was only $12,61.
Do they have to give a rebate?
They would. And John, under this, you want to just walk them through a little bit of the components of the figuring of the.
So the deadline for these postings is January 15th, and it's certainly before budgets are voted on, but it's typically before boards even say this is our budget, this is what we're going to go for. In case of Burlington, there are factors that aren't known, such as labor negotiations, and it just depends on what factors are there. There's a pretty standard formula that allocates our cost to the elementary schools versus the secondary schools, and in some cases it's a guess that the business manager will put down here. So Burlington strategy is a little bit hard to follow, like Richard said, because why would you announce something that's really high and then come down and allow it over $3,000? In that case, they'd owe refunds. There are another strategy in here is Milton, who announces a tuition of $8,820 consistently, and their allowable tuition is much higher. We don't really know what they actually bill, but they could bill a lot more. And these schools we put in because they're in our playing area as far as schools that could attract students that we also would attract. So there are different strategies involved here.
I think on behalf of you folks, what you've done is work really hard to set the most realistic number and try to hope that your allowable comes in very close to that. And Obviously we've had some, we've also been mindful of the impact to the to those sending schools as well. And, I think this falls into the same thinking of a 5-year trend. We're making sure that there's some predictability for these schools to know if things drastically change in percent increases, it can be really difficult for some of the boards that send students to us. When it's what's announced versus what becomes out allowable, that difference is pretty hard at times for some of those locations to stomach. So,
What do you think?
The 12.4% does seem to be a pretty significant increase, but that's consistent with what we're looking at as far as our own budget and what we're facing. So I think it's fair. I think that's fair, and I think that we're in line with the other schools, it looks like.
I do think that all the schools are facing the same health insurance premiums increase.
A lot of the
premium
revenue.
increase, so, well, I think they would be going up an amount too, a significant amount, maybe not 12, but.
Well, I see the FY announced tuition levels here. I mean, are they the announced tuition levels for FY13?
That's the current year, we're actually
Yeah.
working on announced for
Yeah.
14,
Yeah.
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 What was allowable in 13?
We won't know till the audit,
We won't know that.
yeah, that's when the state.
Yeah.
With the progressive program, the special education rate, so every child from another district on an IEP would pay that rate, the school
Yes.
district? And who would get any kind of reimbursement? Would the sending school district get reimbursement from the state, or would the receiving district
The sending district.
for the
Because
IEP
that's why we
services?
have-
That's why we build it at this rate. They're the
And then they
LEA,
get,
and
okay.
they would be able to, yes, right.
Our rate has gone up significantly there because we have fewer students in the program, but same fixed cost, same base cost.
Well, I would say this number worries me in terms of the likelihood of decreased yield.
Which number?
The new number?
14,367. I mean, that's the frightening component, is if it should be too much higher than our competition, we'll see a decline in revenue. .4%. But I hear what Martin says in terms of it being hard to not do something that's kind of in line with what we're doing with our own community.
Well, let me also ask that, because there are different numbers I'm looking at.
Yeah.
On the first page, that box below there, is that the high school, or is that the secondary, or is that a combination?
It's the high school, right?
Oh, the secondary.
We have a couple 8th grade kids too, so secondary is one rate, 7 through 12.
Yeah. What the big box represents the 7 through 12 rates.
This one down here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I was.
Yeah, it's good
comparing
question.
apples to oranges here.
Yep.
Well, so can I just ask another clarifying question? So Milton, for instance, who advertises this low rate every year, and it stays the same every year.
Has 3 years in a row, yeah.
So, what's the thinking there? I'm trying to figure out, because it's not a matter of public record what they end up actually
Oh,
charging.
Sure.
It
Eventually, yes. Yeah.
Oh,
We'd have to dig, all this other information is posted by the state, the actual billing is, we'd have to go to them and ask them what they bill.
mm-hmm.
But how does that work? I mean, to the extent that they attract students from other districts, I assume the districts might say they have an expectation of paying $88.20,
Right.
and then when they get a bill for $12,000,
Well, it's the same as, we did the exercise about a month ago,
Right.
where our allowable was a lot higher than we announced.
right?
And we took into account the fact that, you know, we told the other districts it would be X amount of dollars, so we split it,
Right.
kind of equitably, but not, we didn't raise it $3,000.
Right.
I mean, the
So
group,
their boards would go through the same discussion.
you know, the audience that you're talking to is, I think, you're talking to school boards and you're talking to, you know, central administration, school administration. You know, obviously you're talking to taxpayers too, but I would say that's more secondarily. These locations that have open choice, you know, are looking at what are the best options for them from most likely a programmatic. These are parents and students. You know, I think you as a district have always been pretty consistent with what you're coming out with announced and allowable, and trying to have a fairly close systematic approach to that, where you're not having a wide disparity between what you announce and what you charge.
Right, and I guess we can't, I mean, I don't wanna be seen as subsidizing students coming into the school. So, I mean, I look at this and it seems equivalent to probably what
That's
we're
right.
paying on a per student basis, if not a little bit less. I mean,
Yeah.
I see on our budget that Act 68 per pupil cost is 14,000, but that's just Act 68, that's not total budget per
Right.
pupil
Divided, right, yep.
expense. So I think it's fair that if we're increasing by 13% or thereabouts, that the tuition should.
If you look at the,
Sorry.
John, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you look at what we announced for FY13, and our trend has been kind of in that 85 to 90% of what we announced versus what is allowable,
Mhm.
Right.
then that would lead me to believe that what will be allowable will be somewhere around that 14,000 right now.
Yes.
So if we're at about 90%, it's gonna be at 14,000, so the announced rate will be like 300 or 400 above what will be allowable, what's likely to be allowable based on our trending,
That's
which
correct.
will be the first time in 3 years that
That's
we're announcing above the prior year allowable.
Right.
right.
So that's probably the biggest difference
Mhm.
in my mind. But I don't disagree with you, Martin. I think those are real expenses we're incurring, and it is a year that to deliver those programs, even the benefits alone are warranting a pretty big hike.
Well, I think you as a district, you know, we've done some things, you know, to really be mindful of our students coming from the islands, transportation and activity bus and technology and wireless. I mean, the list goes on to other services. And so I think as a district, you know, and we've been doing a lot of reaching out with our resources from the high school board connections that we've been trying to work on and hold. So, you know, I do think we're giving, you know, a positive experience to the students and trying to also provide information to the community. But when you had something you wanted to add to?
Let me add a little perspective, because I had a chance to work with a lot of districts around us. Parents make the decision where kids are gonna go, and it has nothing to do with what it costs. So those students coming from Georgia and from the islands, they're making decisions on program quality, on transportation, those kinds of issues. I don't think parents ever look at the cost per pupil. The only entity that looks at that is the board when they have to pay it. So that's one issue. That's not all our kids. We have some other tuition students that, you know, it's a different relationship. So that's the issue. And I had a fair amount of experience working with districts that announce low and charge more than that. And some districts accuse them of, I don't know if the word is padding their budget, but when you receive that the next year, that's unanticipated money that receiving district got to use to pay for other kinds of programs. So I say that from a standpoint, be careful that you don't announce low and then charge high, because the districts will say you're gouging them, and that's another issue. And some of the districts that we have interactions with accused other districts of doing that. Not South Burlington, I'll just leave it at that.
So is there a consensus about what to do at this point?
Sounds like we're looking to accept the superintendent's recommendation.
That's
Indicate-
what I hear the tenor of the discussion to be. Is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
No second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, nay? Okay. Recommendation has been approved.
Yeah.
I see our attorney, Mr. Pietro Lynn, in the audience, and that will take us back to item 4 on the agenda, which is an update on the current status of the Howard Center's permit to open a methadone clinic at 364 Dorset Street. Mr. Lynn, what can you tell us about this evening's events?
Well, I just came from the meeting, and the purpose of the meeting is, I may have discussed with both you, Rich, and with David, is that it was disclosed to us there had been an ex parte communication between one of the DRB board members and a member of the public. The person who made the communication and the board member were not initially disclosed to us. When I arrived at the hearing, there was some delay. The board then entered the room as a group and disclosed to us that it was Bill Stuno who had had the ex parte communication with some unidentified resident of South Burlington. He acknowledged that it may well have been somebody who spoke at the hearings that we were at earlier, but he did not recall. He said the nature of the communication was simply to indicate that crime in her neighborhood had decreased since the treatment clinic at Twin Oaks had been closed. That, of course, would be consistent with an argument that we have been making from the outset, specifically that crime will increase with the opening of the methadone clinic in the proximity of the middle school and the high school. Nonetheless, I argued to the board that this was potentially a very serious issue, that we needed some time now that disclosure had been made to study our options and to respond in a formal way to the board as to what we think ought to be done. The board was not interested in hearing those arguments, was not interested in giving us a moment, even a moment, to consider our options, and voted on the spot not to reopen the hearing and not to offer any remedy as a result of the ex parte communication. So the long and the short of it is that the board will now proceed with its deliberations and is not inclined to hear from us on the issue.
And the board member did not recuse himself?
He did not recuse himself. And of course, the argument, I found this interesting, the argument raised by the Howard Center against having any kind of remedy offered as a result of the communication was that it was not an interested party who made the communication. My response, of course, is if we don't know who it is, how can we know whether it's an interested party or not? This is an unidentified person who may or may not have been an interested party. But the board chair seemed very invested in moving the process along and not giving us an opportunity to meaningfully respond. So they voted to continue with their deliberations, not to reopen the hearing, and not to hear any further argument, legal or factual, on the issue.
So, Pietro, does that mean the January 4th deadline is still in play?
That is correct. Now, what I would say is that it certainly creates some issues around any decision that is rendered. This is potentially a serious ex parte communication in violation of the Municipal Administrative Procedures Act, and if we are unhappy with the result of the board's deliberations and determination, that may in and of itself be grounds for appeal and potential reversal.
All right. Other questions or comments from the members of the board? Hearing none, thank you very much. We'll let you go home.
All right.
Or back to the office in your case.
Thank you, Pietro.
Thanks. Okay. That takes us to our public hearing on the 2014 budget process.
We're going to turn the projector on, so maybe Rich, you and I will need to move.
Okay.
And in front of you, you do have some handouts related to the budget. Maybe just one is
Items, these documents?
yes, those documents would be good, mostly for you, Rich, probably just to have. And so,
All right. Take our seats in the back.
yeah, or on the side or wherever. Rich, sorry, you have to make this.
We could start a fiery discussion, see if that would help. Yeah. Yeah, but my sound. Not a problem.
So, Happy New Year. And
Are you
welcome-
sure?
Welcome to our iteration, our next information around the budget. And we are, obviously, time is ticking and decisions are needed and information is needed for you on how best you want to move forward with the approval of this budget. We're gonna walk you through a little bit of information. I'm not gonna walk you back through the preliminary budget presentation that is available and is online now for people to look at. The preliminary budget, which was basically option one of the request of the school board to come out with a status quo, essentially, budget. We've done that, and that's also termed option one or preliminary budget. Option two was to look at, and we're gonna go through this, option two was to look at opportunities or initiatives or incentives on top of the status quo, or status quo plus an initiative or an idea new. So we're gonna go through that with you as well. And then option three is getting down to the governor's recommended, and we're using then our 7-cent mark and what that would look like to you, and we'll present you some of that information and how it reflects upon the preliminary budget. So in front of you, you'll have some quick key points on, which is this sheet, which John has up in front of you. Give you some key points around the status quo option one, the option two with the innovation idea, and then option three. In addition to that, you have in your board packet, you have the budget development worksheet, which is one that we're going to spend some time on. It tells the story about the implications to our taxpayers, etc., and has the details connected with that as well, and we'll walk you through those as well. And again, that's connected more to the 7-cent budget. Again, the 7-cent budget, option three. And then you have the innovative budget information around the status quo and innovative budget, that sheet as well. And then, again, another copy for those that don't have it, or again, a visual. This is the preliminary budget that we did for the board at the last meeting, which represents that status quo preliminary budget. So, with that said, John Stewart and I and Wynn are going to kind of walk you through, where we're at. And again, I'm going to just start out with some of the key points. Again, this is the higher level review before we get into some of the detail. The very top, status quo, obviously is a 14-cent tax rate increase, represents an 8.77% increase on the draw from the ed fund, and a 3.66% increase in the expenses, and that's total budget to total budget. And again, I'll say that again, and it's important for people to make sure they understand our percent budget increase of 3.66 and the represented tax rate. An amount has been included for contract settlements. It represents an increase in the healthcare premiums, an increase in special education, contractual services, reorganization of the central office, and particularly the opportunity to add an HR director and the elimination of the assistant superintendent position. A reduction in classroom supplies, $103,000, a reduction of 4 classroom teachers at the elementary level. And it also requires a divided vote, as the draw from the ed fund does exceed the maximum inflationary amount. So that's status quo, quick key points. Any quick questions from anybody on that, board members, on the recap of key points on status quo budget? Status quo plus innovation, and we're going to go through this in a moment on that sheet that I had talked about. this is where you see the number that was just displayed in front of you at the elementary schools. Thanks, John, for helping out the eyes.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
There's
That's
a
okay.
funny mouth.
So here, what we've done is just on top of the preliminary budget, if there was an add to this, then looking at the elementary school, looking at the one-to-one kind of cart that can go along to help really provide the educational technology integration that we think has been brought to our attention that could be beneficial. At the middle level, looking at a teacher that could help coordinate virtual learning opportunities, looking at kind of performance-based opportunities where kids are ready to do some things beyond their classroom piece, so looking at that as an option. And at the high school, expanding, of course, as we roll out our one-to-one, we've got some grades at the high school in next year, one grade that would not have it, and so this is again the high school's area. And again, the high school's working to have a fair amount of innovative practices embedded in their programming anyway, but this is one that obviously would be in that bucket. And then the details, basically what I just shared with you, with more written feedback. So let me just pause there for a second.
So in this innovative budget,
Yes.
the status quo plus, just to confirm, I think it's probably obvious, you would be reducing the elementary school by 4 positions?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So preliminary budget plus,
Okay.
right? It doesn't add those back in. It was again part of the direction of you folks to say status quo and then
Right.
innovative.
And David,
Initiative.
would the one-to-one devices at the elementary school replace any desktop situations?
They would. There would. I mean, I don't have the exact breakdown, but part of our thinking is to diminish the dependency on desktops, so that more mobile units can be deployed. Similar approach where they progress then into the middle school and then into the high school, and where there is the one-to-one initiative. But it would allow a classroom teacher to sign out that cart so that they could, effectively all have a device in front of them to be able to use. It doesn't totally get rid of the desktops, but we're being mindful about not buying new desktops plus a laptop or a cart. Again, I don't want to call it necessarily a laptop. It's a device cart. It could be an iPad cart or some sort of a device like that.
Just in very simplest mathematical terms, we're talking about spending an extra $150,000 to innovate.
Right. That's right. So you see that in the preliminary budget at the top was the status quo at 43,647, and then the added to the 43,8. That's right. So it's that difference is the amount. Yep. I think
And from to carry that through in the other direction, we know that the status quo budget is a 14-cent tax rate increase. This would translate to what, 14 and a half, something?
14 2/3.
right.
14 2/3.
Again, we're still using that metric of 225,000 roughly as on a cent tax rate increase or decrease. So questions related to that? And again, this is all in your packet. This narrative is in your packet as well. I say that. Yeah, it's in your packet as well with the narrative portion.
Are the numbers for the status quo plus innovation somewhere in here?
Just there, we didn't go through that.
Yeah, we did not redo a budget development sheet
Oh,
for you.
could you do that?
We could, yeah. Again, we can actually, do it,
We can create it on the
Easy for
screen
you.
there if we
Yeah.
want to see it.
if that's a desire that you'd like to see us,
I'd like to see
That would
it.
be, I'd like to see it.
yeah. Put Mr. Stewart on the spot here to make a quick
Sorry,
budgetary development change.
it though, $153,000.
Yep.
Close enough.
So it winds up being 14.6 cents on the tax rate, 10.35% increase, and
What's it do to the average house?
yeah, 471.
Thank you.
What's the status quo per household?
For
2,
No,
status
it's
quo,
449.
422.
no, about 449.
Should we move on to the 7-cent
Yeah, so
version?
if there's no other questions, then, maybe moving on would be the right choice. And this is, again, the staple packet. We'll start out with the budget development sheet that represents the 7-cent increase.
Try to get that all in. See it
So
all.
on your sheet, where you see it in red on the screen, it does have the cut to achieve the 7-cent. Again, the initial mark was to try to be cognizant of the governor's direction, and we also have had some discussion around the two-part vote split. And again, I think it's important just to see all those things at play. So a quick review of this. And John, why don't you just walk through those same, point to those same metrics that I just highlighted around, well, let me do this. Let me be consistent with what I did first. So on option 3, again, going through the bullet points on this sheet that I have given you, which you'll be able to follow on the budget development sheet, what you see is it's a 7-cent tax rate increase, down from 14. So you see where it represents the 7 cents. John's on it. That represents a 3.94% draw from the ed fund and a 0.1% decrease in expenses. Again, total budget to total budget. It represents a high school reduction in programs of $513,670, and middle school reduction of $315,000, elementary reduction of $325,000, 5 additional teachers, special ed services reduction of $55,000, other programs $373,000, and it still requires Part B amount to be $186,000, which you see correspond in that bottom portion. Questions before we move on to some more specific details that are within that? Again, I think it really important, as I said on the status quo, is that what you have going on, even with a decrease in total budget to total budget, you've got a tax rate increase. 7-cent tax rate increase with a budget total to total reductions. Okay, so moving on, we'll go through the reductions. And again, what you see on the very top left is the preliminary budget in expenses, and then we're going to do the subtractions. So what you see here at the elementary side, you see 1 additional reduction at Rick Marcotte, 2 additional at Chamberlain. Again, what in brackets are the total reductions from preliminary to the 7-cent budget, this option 3 budget. And then at Orchard, 2 additional for a total of 4. At the middle school, again, these are the marked reductions library media specialist, co-curricular program, 0.5 literacy, equivalent of one person per the exploratories, French world language, one teacher in the 7th and 8th grade chorus, algebra for 7th grade, further reduction in the supplies and books area that rounds that out. At the high school, again, course elimination to the tune of $355,000, and really puts significant limits on courses for students across the board at the high school. Non-academic department programs, elimination of non-varsity sports, and elimination of some clubs. Under support services, don't replace computers at the K-5 with new, extend those warranties by 1 year. Color copiers, business office reduction, again, you can read through those pieces. Reduction of field trip by half, field trips, reduction of support staff, professional development. And then district-wide, reduce costs at convocation. Again, we put a fairly healthy, welcome back spread, and that's a reduction there. Nutritional services, we had in the budget initially $125,000 to go towards that. That eliminates that, it reduces it only to $25,000 contribution. 65,000 support staff, we would only pay the minimum required. Delay replacement of the lighting and sound equipment, 21, and delay the gymnasium roof at the high school, defer it for 1 year. And then special ed, psychological services expense reduction, and speech and language reduction for then the sum total of what you see on the bottom right there, 1582089. We'll go to the next page. I assume you're going to have some good amount of questions on some of these pieces. What I provided you here is just, again, this is actually off of our SQL server. We do have this information available, for us on real time when we can look at our configurations. This is a snapshot of that. So this top box, and we'll focus on the table actually. What you see is the current, what's happening in the current, and then what's projected. And so you have the number of students. This is district-wide for all of our students. And below that box is you see the average class size. Again, that's district-wide, both current and then projected FY 13-14. If we go down, we'll come to Rick Marcotte Central School. You see the current configuration that we're in now. And you see that there's expected lower number of students. And again, that does assume a slight increase in kindergarten numbers coming in. But you see a reduction here of 2 teachers at Rick Marcotte. And then below, you see the average class sizes in here. Kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And then an average here. Continuing on, you go to Chamberlain. Again, similar format, projected as a -3. It again shows you then the class averages for the 1st grade, kindergarten through 5th grade, number with an average of 19 in theirs. And then Orchard. John, scroll to Orchard, and you see a -4 at Orchard, and class size is there. The details or the impacts, what impact this has, and again, my words, significant, significant impact for us at this 7-cent mark. The reduction of non-classroom teachers accounts to the $585,000. The impact on education, again, my words, significant. in that the current makeup of our elementary schools would be very disruptive. Our professional development practices that have been going on, anytime you change that complexity and that group of people that are moving forward, you make some pretty significant changes on top of what I would say, upper extreme numbers in the classroom become a difficult, a difficult issue. I think as action plans are currently developed and we're moving forward in many of those areas in a positive way and working to meet our ends, this becomes, significantly disruptive. Significant disruptions happen when you have a reduction in staff, reduction in force based on seniority. The location where we may be making the change, maybe where most senior teachers are, who will exercise perhaps their rights to bump a less senior person. So when you talk about one person, that can have pretty significant, when we talk about 2, 3, or so on, that can have pretty significant disruptions. Currently, the board, did what I would say was a wonderful thing this past year, and you put teachers into those classrooms. Those current teachers are on 1-year only contracts, so that would not necessarily factor into that bump. But when you go to 9, then it activates those bumps and disruptions. Under your class size policy, the G6, which we spent some time talking about in this scenario, 5 grade levels would be affected that would exceed, be either at or exceed that. So again, 5 would be at the maximum average or not to exceed, and that would be Rick Marcotte, grade 3, Chamberlain grades 1 and 3, Orchard grades 1 and 2. In part, this is difficult because the number of students, by then what you divide, if I have 50 students, I mean, it's fairly, simple math as you try to divide, you have 2 teachers into 50, you have 25. If you really divide it, if it's only 1, then you've got 50. If you're dividing it by 3, obviously you've got a smaller number. So significantly disruptive at that level. So let me pause and take questions that you may have where we can get into some more detail on this as well.
So David, you have backup here for the reductions at the elementary school and the middle school, and I don't see any backup for the reductions at the high school.
Right. In part, my approach at the elementary was really, I established a class size and said, if I bump the class size up, if I said can't be anything less than 15 or anything less than 16, then what would that mean? And that essentially flushed out the number of teachers needed for that particular grade in that particular school. When I factored and tried to do the same thing at the elementary and the middle, those numbers don't really equate because there's far more variability with the middle school and the high school. The high school, for instance, if you're a teacher of a certain course, you may have a smaller section in your first period or block, but larger than the other. But your average aggregate is well above my 15. It's fine. So what I chose to do here was actually give them a number figure that I felt was equitable at the high school and the middle school to get to the 7-cent mark. So that's essentially what I did. The background of this is what I would say very specific at the high school, and I want to be careful not to create a lot of upheaval. Again, it's been developed, it's done, but to share it openly with you folks at this point on what would be the disruptions or the individual programs might be, would be a little bit too forward at the present time unless I get some more directions.
Well, I guess I'm just, it's just too general for me at the high school level, just particularly the course elimination and limits on courses for students across the board.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, we need to know, does that mean we're gonna have 10 fewer teachers, we're gonna have 20 less courses?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the specifics as far as these particular classes are going away, but knowing the number
Correct.
of riffs that would have to be done, and just generally the number of courses that we would be losing, I think would be very helpful to
I think,
understand.
you know, and I could have done more with the implications, you know, I'm not wanting to paint such a negative picture. It's very, very disruptive at our present level in moving the district forward, whether it's the high school, middle school, or elementary, on working to our ends. Particularly at the high school, you know, the NEASC accreditation and all of their work around providing the types of programs that, you know, careers or colleges are looking for is very clear in their accreditation work, and that's in part why some of the programs have become available. Program of studies is the way that the high school has run their program, where students sign up for those. It would be based on, there's not enough participation, there's not enough enrollment in these programs won't run. So those will change, and in the past, there's been some flexibility where those class sizes have been able to be smaller, maybe on certain periods or blocks, and that would be eliminated in this. Those would be eliminated. You would not be running the same verbose, my words, the same number of programs at the high school. Couldn't happen under this proposal. What those would be are contingent upon what kids would sign up for.
So let me say that we did advertise this as a public hearing. We've had a little presentation about a couple of options, 3 options really. It's time, I think, to ask whether the public has any thoughts for the board or comments for the board before we try to push further.
Yeah, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
David, I am interested in some specific information on the high school. It really stands out as being inconsistent with the elementary schools and the middle schools by not naming the courses or the clubs. And I'm sure those exist, but I think it's not a fair representation to have the other schools be so specific and
Yeah.
the high school be vague.
Yeah, it is, and I can work to give you some additional clarity. To be honest with you, we've been pushing to get all of this collected, you know, and together for you. The high school is very much, you know, different, and it's a selected process. You don't really know what's going to run. I mean, there is some trend data because we know this class is always very popular, but a lot of it is based on the schedule selection and the program of studies, what gets offered to students and what students sign up versus we're going to only run these programs. This begins to change that and say we're only going to run programs that are going to be at or above. So basically, the program of studies that we know today would be very different in what we would be able to offer under this scenario.
Well,
And again, I am being general. I'm not giving you specifics. I don't have them in front of me. I've done some, you know, speculative work with Patrick, you know, and his staff on this around, you know, the program of studies essentially would be significantly altered. You wouldn't be running the same programs with the same number of people.
I understand the issue of variability there, but I also think, could you just give us numbers based on what happened this year? So based on this year's enrollment, these are the classes that would be cut.
You could, yeah. I think you could certainly, you know, do a, you know, an exercise of what effect it would have if we were to exercise it now. I'm not trying to be difficult. I think for like programs, clubs, we often have certain times that you've had no club activity and certain things for years past, we don't run them. And then there's a group of kids that come along and it's basically that club becomes available. That would be, and I can tell you that those, you know, ones that are not so popular right now would not run. That's certainly articulated in there, as well as, you know, the other information in here that's connected to the high school around, you know, the non-varsity sports into some of those clubs that
Yeah,
would
I
have
mean,
higher.
if we're trying to find, you know, to really put some meat on it, following up on what Julie said, is that if you had this amount less this past year, what would we have not seen? Because I mean, that's really what I'm trying to put some meat on, so that when, you know, we're talking to the public, when we're defending wherever we end up with the budget, that we can say, well, this would be the effect if we were at 7 cents.
same group of students signed up for the same types of classes in the year in which we're in the speculative 7-cent mark.
Okay. Other comments?
I just assume you mean, under district-wide, 18 students per grade for, as opposed to 18 teachers per grade. Or am I reading that wrong?
We're not
Grade
sure where
5
that.
level approaching a minimum average level of 18, is it students per grade or 18 teachers per grade? Is it 18 teachers?
It's 18 teachers.
It is 18
No,
No,
that's
students.
wrong. That's wrong.
That's
students per grade?
Yeah,
Which page is that on?
it's the very first one, elementary, just highlighted. Shade. Yeah, thank you for the catch.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I don't see any effort to reduce the amount of personnel and support services for things other than the direct schools themselves. That seems like that would be out of balance to me in terms of trying to look at the priorities for the district.
David, do you have a thought about that?
Support services being like paraeducators, administrative assistants, those types of things.
Anybody who's not
Yeah.
a upfront classroom teacher.
No, I think, again, to get to the 7-cent mark, Dan, we did look at a lot of those things. In the district, we've spent, I'm gonna say, the last 6 years really trying to be mindful about, those ratios. And so in some places where we had an abundant numbers, we've made reductions and actually added the teacher in certain places, and for instance, in support services for a paraeducator. So, I think there's also the service side of what students need that also drive that number. So, that's not necessarily as, as movable as has been. Again, those are individuals that are specifically tied to an IEP for a student. So, we have looked at it.
I guess I'm really asking, this is a pass of trying to get $1.5 million out of the budget, where we have to come from. This is a solution. Are there other solutions that involve different balances of
Sure.
risk?
Well, yeah, I think, you can look at all,
Looking at?
you can look at other avenues as well. And I think, from my perspective, I want to be, try to be somewhat wise about how we go about doing this. And that is, transportation, not required except for special education. But we know that that's not a workable solution in South Burlington, given our proximity, our location, our roads and things of that nature. So, those are things that, that is another option, solution. But from my perspective, certainly one that doesn't even pass the initial test to the board. And again, this was not easy. This was not an easy place to get to under our current structured system. Part of what I've talked about, again, the budget advisory group that's here tonight is looking at a long-range plan, in 2020, where we can have more diligent discussions with our neighbors around shared courses or shared programming, where we have diminishing numbers of students, where we can make this more workable. And again, that's my desire. I think that I have some partners in this, and having those discussions, but we're not there yet. And so I don't see that, I can make a whole lot of other concessions at this point to get to the 7 cents.
How about, David, I know we've talked before about both nutritional services, which continues to run a deficit. So not only is it a big bucket, it's leaking faster than we can fill it at this point. And transportation. I'm a little bit concerned about your blanket statement that it's not even worth discussing, because I'm curious as to, have we surveyed parents and guardians and kind of said, if this were to go away even over a planned period of time, what are the alternatives? I understand that cutting something significant that's been there in a 1-year period would certainly present some challenges, but I am concerned about those blanket statements that
Right,
create
and
these sacred cows that maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah, and I didn't mean it, I meant it kind of the all or nothing statement, take all transportation, but it's not really a viable solution. We've worked to minimize our numbers of buses in our routes. Wynn's done some good work with that around looking at, our participation in the after school, so we've been able to diminish some of our route buses. We, in the past, have had, several years ago, there was a desire to look at taking away transportation, and there was a fair amount of negative feedback that came back from the community. But as far as any formal survey of transportation, that's not happened from in my time here. I think the other part of transportation is the infrastructure around what needs to happen around drop-offs. If it's going to be mostly car traffic, because the schools are not in locations where it warrants blocking, which we do have, quite a few of those. So anyway.
John?
I do think our facility group and custodial staff, last year, if you go back to the 13 budget, it got reorganized, and we cut about $100,000 out of that area. And we looked at that pretty closely again, but don't see a lot of return for cutting at this point. So that's why it doesn't show up at all. But you go back a year, and it really was significantly reduced.
So, where do we go from here?
I would just like to follow up with what Martin and Julie were saying. I really need more information too about the $355,000 course elimination, because as we talk about preparing our students for their next steps, I can't really evaluate that dollar amount unless I know exactly what we're talking about in terms of courses. So I think I need more information about that. And are there other non-academic areas that have been explored versus the course elimination? That's sort of.
Yeah. I think the course elimination was based on those lower enrollment numbers. And again, when I say lower, wherever that number is, whatever that lower is, would be the ones that would go away. Obviously, the core programming that we are required to have to happen. What we would say, those additional programs that we offer is what I would say positive incentives, opportunities for kids, would be ones that are often looked at. The general math is that the way it looks now would look different under the current year. And so I can give you more specifically what that would look like if you did it this year with this scenario. But I think you'd be safe to say that there's going to be a lot less programming offered to students that would be running.
I think it's really important, though, David, for us to understand what kinds of things you're cutting. You know what I mean? Just generally, what kinds of things are you cutting? What things have such low enrollment that they would be on the chopping block? Yeah. And they may not be the same year to year, but I've got to believe that they're similar year to year.
Well, let's just think about this from a time frame perspective. We've got to make a decision when, David?
Well, we're up against, we've got our next board meeting, which is the 9th, which really is a decision point for us to get some things in motion and effective communication, plan out there to do that. So I mean, we can work to have another meeting. The 16th really becomes too late. I mean, for us to try to then get on top of all the things that we need to do. So I mean, I'd love to be able to have, be right upon a decision on the 9th if we could, which there's a lot of work that we need to provide you. I mean, my recommendation might be this, is again, I can work to give you we'll call a mock example of what that would look like at the high school. But I think what you might want from me is to say, I'm gonna expect that you might say that's the 7 cent mark is pretty significant. So what would it take to go up the ladder to eliminate some of a good number of those concerns? Where would that put you? In other words, eliminate the majority of the concerns that would allow us to continue to move forward the ends and the objectives of our action plans at schools. Where would that get you? And then be able to share that with you based on kind of what I'll say our bracketing, our preliminary budget, our 7 cent, yes, and our initiative. But, you know, there's pretty significant effects at the 7 cent mark. Yes, I need to give you clarity on the high school, but I think you can safely see that 9 at the elementaries, the reductions at the middle school have an effect that would lessen our ability to keep moving ourselves forward.
So I think we tried to get a couple of different points for comparison
Yep.
of looking at the budget. But I've always kind of also thought, though, that the status quo is to keep moving our program forward.
Right.
It's not like we're keeping everything as it is this year. For instance,
That's
there
true.
are 4 teachers reduced in the elementary school for the status quo. And I guess I would expect that the status quo has looked for wherever else we can cut without harming the programs. And if that's not the case, that's certainly take another shot at, at that. So, because here, if we're looking at just elementary school, where do you decide if you want to add one more teacher? How do you decide whether to put them, another teacher at Chamberlain, Orchard,
Yeah.
or?
Well, and that's part of what
Or-
that's part of what you asked me to do. And again, I part of that is back to the administrator, how I would go about adding in or restoring some of those pieces. The status quo budget, when we came up with that, again, there's 4 teachers in there. So I want you to think that it wasn't just the status quo, and there's other pieces like our stewardship plan where we thought hard about some of those things that we could appropriately delay in our expenses as well. So, we've done that work. Now, I'm not saying that it's, culled out everything at all. But again, the status quo was exactly that, to try to move us forward. That said, there are things between the 7 cent and the 14 cent that I'm working up that would be where I can work to diminish a lot of the concerns that are raised. And I don't know where that would be. I haven't done that work because I haven't given me that direction, but where would that be? Would it be at 8? Would it be at 9? Would it be at 10 cents? I'm just talking that from a bracketing perspective to give you some more, visual help that you can then guide me. John, you had something you wanted to add. Did you want to add to my
Well, I mean,
statement?
just, David had talking points about the preliminary budget, but there was a lot of review. Preliminary wasn't just move last year's over to next year. There was a lot of cuts that were kind of insignificant that add up to something in the preliminary budget. But the fact is, we've lost a lot of revenue. We've had a huge health increase, and we have contract negotiations. So those 3 things are pushing all this other stuff that I don't really think a lot of us really want to do. It's just a matter of getting to a point where you have enough information and make those hard calls.
I would love to be able to come right back to very tangible evidence for you that points you to, our ends development and our work. And, I very much like for you to hold me to that outcome around moving us forward. What I worry about is when you significantly change the makeup, then it has a result. And I'm wanting to be held to the fire around, advancing our programs for kids. And it does become hard when the factors begin to change, change so frequently. And so, again, that's what you paid me to do, is to try to figure out how we can continue to move forward and be also mindful to the taxpayers of South Burlington. So I definitely hear kind of some want for some kind of, what I'll say, high school mock.
Yeah,
info.
well, yeah, David, I'd like to be clearer on that. It's not mock. I mean,
Well,
I will tell you and I don't mean to be, harsh here, but if I got this budget and there was this lack of specificity in it, I would say it deserves to be cut, because there are no specifics. So in order to evaluate the value of what is being included here, we need to know what it is. And I'm sure Patrick knows that. Just the fact that there was a level of specificity in these other categories, the work was done to demonstrate that. So that's the specifics on the high school. On the other areas, deferring paying off a liability is not saving money. It's reducing how much we pay off of a debt we've already incurred. Right. So I was hopeful we would see some real challenges here around what is our obligation, for instance, with our nutritional services program. What are we federally and state mandated to provide that is nutritional, that values local produce, all the things we're trying to do, but that doesn't incur a deficit every single year. And I know we're not going to get to that in this budget cycle, but I hope those are the kinds of programmatic, higher level programs that we're looking at in the future that aren't teachers in front of students and aren't direct instruction. The other area that I think is critical, I think I do think you're into muscle and bone here at the 7-cent level. And I think the status quo scenario, when you look at an operating expense increase at that 3.6% level, that's not unreasonable in terms of an overall operating budget increase. However, that's still 14 cents on the tax rate, and close to $477 or $425 on the average household. So the larger part of that hit is outside the control of the district. So I think Martin said it, I think we're all saying it, is the board is really starting to pull together the story that we're going to need to take to taxpayers around the budget that we're recommending and the value it delivers. And again, it's hard for me to put value around some of the things that are deferring paying off deficits, for instance, and that don't have a level of specificity of, we want to preserve XYZ sports at the high school level for these reasons and these kinds of courses, regardless of the enrollment level, because it's a critical part of a program that is preparing some percentage of our high school students for their next step. So again, I'm kind of looking at the total picture, and I think what you're hearing is we need to get tight around the story, and I'm hearing what you're saying, which is somewhere between 7 and 14 cents is probably where we'll end up. But I think what you're also hearing is that this requirement for some critical information.
The other observation I would make is that, some of the things we're talking about deferring run the risk of causing additional expense. Thinking about the gymnasium roof, for example.
But again, there's always those risk factors. Again,
Sure.
I think one of the things that you should be proud of is that we have definitely put a lot of time and energy into assessing and servicing our and so we're again, it's on there because it's timed that way. But I want to tell you that we're in a much better, different place than we were years ago, where it was unknown to us. So I feel that we're in a much better place, and that's not the most desirable decision, but it's an acceptable one that I feel has some risk assessment decision around it.
Well, the other one that I see that, you know, I know is a cost ultimately, relates to retirement, you know, contribution to retirement. Contributions to retirement we don't make this year don't make earnings to reduce our expenses in the future, so that worries and troubles me as well. I guess the question is whether there is more direction from the board at this point for David. I don't know that there is, but if there is, it's time. Lisa?
I haven't been on the citizens budget group this year, so I apologize for some of the comments, which probably should be reserved for that forum rather than this, but I agree with Elizabeth that I don't think a 3.6 or whatever the status quo budget is unreasonable from an expenditure standpoint. And it is all this other factor, these other factors. I don't understand the 7% thing, is that just a governor's try to stick to?
Well, the governor came out with a statement to try to, you know, really hold down budgets, but, you know, there's more to the story, perhaps, that, you know, he hasn't been briefed necessarily on all of the revenue reduction and healthcare costs that
Right.
other factors that are happening.
If memory serves me correctly, a few years ago, it was a 3%. He was trying to get everybody to stick to a 3%. We were the only school district in this half of the state that was able to do that, only because we had banked our federal money. And you know, we've now spent it. So I think we're in a catch-up situation, if you will, where we were able to stick to his recommendation a few years ago when no one else was able to, because they had spent their federal money, and now we have spent ours, and we're in a catch-up mode. One of the things that Mr. Fleming has suggested is to try and do budgets looking out over a number of years. And is this catch-up mode a one-time thing?
Well, that's part, Lisa, that's a good question. I mean, of course, there's so many factors often at play that, you know, to be able to predict that is not as easy.
Right.
But that's what we'd like to try to get to, again, with the budget advisory group. That's part of our work, is to look at, you know, a 5-year spending, you know, connected with the 2020 vision, so that you can, again, I think the sell to a community member with tax rate implications, if it's in just a 1-year look and doesn't have any sort of story for the following year or the year after, it can lead people into a place that's not very positive on outcomes. So, you know, it's important for us to do that. We did in the budget development preliminary sheet, we did share kind of our tax rate, or our implications over the last 8 years, and you know, tells the story of our average increases. And although one of the things that that did come out of our last meeting was to provide the board with, if we were to take out that revenue, federal revenue, what that would have looked like for us. So,
I haven't.
did you have it? No, great. I wasn't sure you were going to be able to get to it. So this corresponds to that page 5 in the budget development, in the budget sheet, that was a handout. But we broke that out a little bit differently with the change in the revenue stream that had it not come to us. So John, let me just let you explain that.
Okay. Yeah, this was the sheet we had last week that showed our proposed, this is the total expenditures increase over since 2007, and then the tax increases. And the question was, well, if we didn't have federal money, what would the tax increases have been? What would the tax rate have been? So basically, it's the carryover in this year right here was 2010, I believe. The tax rate would have been $1.42, 1.4284, and it was 1.4170, and so on down to the current year, where our tax rate went up 2.78% as $1.41. It would have been $1.49 without that $1.8 million carryover. So I guess without the tax, without the carryover, you take the 1.4928 compared to our preliminary budget, the increase isn't anywhere near as steep, but people have paid these taxes over the last 5 years because of our federal money. So
Thanks for sharing that.
Just to go back to Lisa's question and think about the future. I'll ask the superintendent to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see a drop like the drop in federal revenue that we experienced this year. So are we swallowing the bulk of this problem this year? I think so.
I mean, certainly, you know, we've got healthcare, we've got reduced
could happen
revenue,
again.
you know, these are big players for us. And, you're absolutely right that, you know, a drop in revenue like that, like we're seeing this year, I would say is unlikely to happen the following year. So, I mean, I do see that there's relief in the next budget year.
But the other side of the coin is that we're in negotiations. So would it be easy to spend $1.5 million in negotiations? Oh, sure would. Sure would. But wouldn't be wise.
The healthcare increase, is that any way tied to what's going on in the state, so moving toward a,
Not this year, it isn't.
no?
Well, I don't know that that's true, you know, I mean, I think there may be some players in the system who are anticipating reform and trying to
Think that that's gonna have an effect on it.
get some money this year, because they may not be able to get it next year.
But you're also hearing that rate nationwide.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. The other question, you know, that your comments, Lisa, about, and Elizabeth's comments about the increase in expenses being not unreasonable, that's true. But the other side of that coin is a 14-cent tax rate increase saleable? I don't know the answer to that. Kathy?
This is the last year for the split, where it would have to be split out when we exceed the
Yes.
budget, yes? So, would it be not smart to think of a way to avoid the split and defer what we can to next year where the vote won't be split? Is there a way that we can make that work for simplicity's sake and?
Well, we can go back to the 7-cent development sheet that John had up earlier, Kathy,
And that's the.
we're 186,000 over that still, so to get down, we have to
Okay.
cut an additional 186, I'm rough, 186,751 to get to the no-2 vote.
Yeah,
And so it would have, you know, further effects on
Still
our
worse,
program, yeah. Yeah.
And you
Can
know,
you do-
when you defer expenses, you typically increase them.
right.
I mean,
I
can you
mean-
do some really crazy things like defer all maintenance, everything in the capital expenditure plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done that.
The problem with that, you know, is that, you know, we've done, that's what essentially got, well, I'm not gonna say just us, has gotten schools into places where then they're non-returnable. And again, I think what we've been really mindful of is that, and again, you're in certain parts of the school where there's things that have been identified as needing to be replaced, carpets. And we've been trying to be very diligent about that. But if we don't take care of some things, they become very problematic. So we've really scrubbed that list. And we'll continue to scrub that list. But again, I think we've been really, it's not just about replacement, it's been about taking care of, you know, which, you know, I feel like I'm proud of our staff for really having those plans.
When I think back of what's been done in the past to try and do that, you know, one of the leading areas where that game has been played is with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, oh, well, we just won't buy the computers this year. We'll stretch out our computers and go 5 years rather than 4 years. Well, it's harder to do that now than it used to be. And it wasn't probably a very good idea then.
I mean, I think your thinking is absolutely right. I mean, we're
Just to get
trying
out
to
of
make
the two
decisions
votes.
that are as far away from kids and having outcomes that we know we need. You know, I'm not saying we got it all right. I'm working hard to really call that out to make sure that I don't hamper ourselves in effectively moving forward, you know, the types of programs that we need for kids. And things, you know, like the deferment of the roof is an example of that. But we put some assessment and the risk along with it.
So let me say this to my board, it seems as though our next meeting is our decision meeting, effectively. And you're not ready to decide.
But there's no way.
Well,
Well,
again,
we're gonna have to decide based upon the information we have. Now, we can press David for more information, but in the end, we'll have to decide. Information adequate or not.
Given that, I just think, I mean,
Yeah.
my opinion is that there has to be something that we're given between these two amounts. These, what I would say, the
Well, that's
7 cent
that's
and the
exactly where my
14 cent.
question was aiming, in terms of thinking about this, about effectively our next meeting being a decision meeting. And that is, you can look at this from a program side, but you can also think about it from the perspective of what's likely to be politically acceptable to the voters' side in terms of giving some additional guidance to the administration. You could say, well, what would a 10-cent budget look like? Or what would a 12-cent budget look like? You know, I don't know what, but we do have the option tonight, which we won't have next time, of saying, you know, give us a budget that has this bottom line. And I'm asking you, what do you want? Or are these the options you want to choose from?
See, it seems to me that 7, 10, 12, 14 are all arbitrary.
Yeah,
To some extent. And what
Yeah.
what we need to say is, what I think we should say is, I want to know what would keep us going with the programs we have and be able to offer what we're offering now. And that's kind of goes back to my, having said the status quo, but it means that there's it's trim, it's gotta be lean. But I mean, that kind of bases it, and then you go and you sell that to the public, that this is what we've done, as opposed to just kind of pulling 7, 10, 7 cents as a basis.
Well,
The 7
the
cents
problem
was a
with that,
basis.
Martin, is that when you look at the 14-cent tax increase rate, that's $449 on an average house.
Right.
The 7 cent is $227 on an average house. That's a really big difference for families, for a lot of families.
True, but I guess I'm just saying that I don't know what the basis of saying $300.
Well, the problem
or
is you
400
can't
or
evaluate
whatever.
the 7 cent situation right now because we don't have all the information.
That I agree, absolutely, I agree
And-
with that.
So one thing that I think should be clear, and I think is clear to David, is we need all the information to evaluate the 7-cent option.
Right, but we need another option.
Well, and that's a question, and we could come to that from a admittedly arbitrary perspective, or there might be some other way to do it. What I heard Martin saying was, first of all, I would say to David that calling this the status quo budget when we're cutting for teachers is not probably the way we want to
and
package it.
again, this is
Yeah.
what we viewed as preliminary and the board
Sure.
direction. I'm using kind of trying to be consistent with board direction, and that was status quo. We turned that then into preliminary and option one synonymous. And as we move forward, you're absolutely right, Rich. Some communication around, what we're thinking around
Mhm.
that proposal goes out is going to be important. Preliminary, then to, the budget developed, approved.
So what I hear Martin saying, is, and I'm not sure if there's support beyond Martin, and I'm not sure if I'm interpreting him correctly, is where he would focus is trying to push down this option one budget a little more, or as much more as we can.
As much more as we can without adversely or significantly adversely affecting
Our program.
the program.
That
And
may
if
be
that
as much
ends up-
direction as we can give tonight.
Yeah, if that ends up being 13 cents, 12 cents, or even 14 cents now, but
Yeah.
it's a basis.
Well, again, I want to be clear, what I have tried to do is provide you, and again, it always seems like time is of the essence. And so, I look at this timeline and still say, it wasn't aggressive enough. I haven't had enough time for you to have the reflection, or I haven't provided you all of what you needed. That said, the status quo tried to do the diligent work, and there was a lot of behind the scenes, as John articulated. At the 7-cent mark, I think it's, I just want to, I think I'm fairly clear that there's some pretty significant effects at the elementary and pretty significant, there's effects at the elementary and there's effects at the middle school. And I owe you some more explicit information on what those effects might be, what they might look like at the high school. But safe to say that I think there's some effects at that level. And my thinking was, out of tonight would be some level of acknowledgement that that is, significant effects. And my direction to you would be give me some next steps to work it back up, or in Martin's case, work it down from preliminary, so that I could minimize the concerns that would allow me to continue to move forward the district and meeting, the things, the essential program and needs that we have for the students. So that was kind of my thinking, and you're actually getting there. And again, I owe you the high school affirmation, if you will. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think when you see it, it will have some significance to you.
And David, I see the huge implications in the 7 cent. I mean, at a time when we're going to be moving forward with the whole Common Core and potentially class sizes, I mean, that's concerning. I hear that. I really do.
Yeah.
I was just really wanting to understand better what the implications are at the high school level.
Fair.
Because to me, it's very clear what the implications would be at the elementary and middle school level. But I don't know I need meaning, like what does that mean at that level? But clearly, there are huge implications at the 7 cent level. I agree with that. Of course, I would like to maintain programs and move our district forward. And so I'm understanding what Martin is saying. Is there any more push, any more give down from the preliminary status quo budget? I mean, I'm concerned about the 7.
Shall we call it the current program budget for now, anyway?
It's fine.
If you come up with a better package.
Well, I'll come up with
with
something.
it,
Again, it became confusing
Yeah.
a couple meetings ago, so that's where we came out with kind of a synonymous and status quo
Yeah.
and that stuff.
I see Kathy has a comment or a question.
I do have a question, and that is regarding class size policy. We have a policy that says in the elementary school you can't have above, is it 22?
Well, there's
children
different
per
gates
class?
that we have specified in the teacher's contract
For-
in D6, which we outlined
Right,
for you,
right.
and I just called out those that were either at or above
Or above,
those numbers.
right.
Yeah.
So
That was at the 7 cent.
It's a recommendation, it's not a requirement.
But under board policy?
I don't think that's right. I think it is board policy.
No, I think it's
But
policy.
but we can change board policy if we need to.
But
And so my question was-
It's a range, we've talked about this
Well,
before.
It can be interpreted. The class size numbers can
Some
somewhat can be
interpretation.
interpreted. So if I'm a classroom teacher, my numbers might be a little bit on the higher end, and yours, when you divide out a number, you're going to have some unequalness. And so the guideline is that in the school, under grade 1, you are at or below that number.
Right, but I thought there was a cap. I thought it was
Yep,
more
there
severe
is. There's a
cap.
maximum not to
So-
exceed number.
Right,
and
which
that's
we
what
are
I treat.
exceeding in this budget. So if we are not to exceed that, but yet we have this in the proposed budget, I'm wondering how it could be
Well,
proposed.
remember, Kathy,
Yes.
I'm sorry to.
Sorry if
hope
I'm
not interrupt.
confused. Sorry.
The status quo budget worked hard to keep those within range.
Right,
The
I
status, the 7 cent one, did what we needed to do to get to a number. And again, what you're hearing from the board is, and others around, what would you now need to do to to either go from status quo and a little bit below that. And so those would be things that I would be looking at. And again, the board would be expecting that I would look to try to mitigate some of those significant things.
I understand, but I think my question would be, how could that be proposed in the first place if it's if it's not part of the policy?
Let us
I guess.
suppose that the voters don't approve a budget, and we go back to this year's numbers.
So then you would
I am
have to
sure,
modify your policy?
I am
Is that
sure
what
that
you're
we're
saying?
gonna have to change some policies.
Okay, I guess I was just asking how that would
I
move
think,
ahead.
you know,
Okay,
having policies doesn't mean you can't propose
change
to
it.
do something
Yeah.
that's different from the policy, but you need to acknowledge that it's
Okay,
inconsistent with your policy.
Doesn't the state also have the class size?
okay.
Well, that's, Rich is actually referring to that policy that was, came out from the state, that the board adopted, I think, a couple of years ago. You know, it was, we call it our D6, policy.
Ours, it
Class
mirrors-
size,
it
it
mirrors
has
the state?
optimum and maximum not to exceed, and again, it's, the interpretation of how that is, again, I view it as a whole, you know, a grade, you know, it's a grade level, not necessarily gonna have to be small granular, singular grade. But, you know, it's hard when you have 50 students in a school in one grade, and your tradition of providing the service has been a straight classroom setting. You know, you divide 50 by 2, it's 25, you know, and then you
Every
divide
time.
it by 3, it's, you know, smaller number. So, you know, those are some of the things, the factors at play, and, you know, that are school specific.
David, there's, in terms of the 9th, I think a couple other things that would be helpful would be to get a, kind of a ballpark next year or second year scenario, because I think we're gonna be looking to tell a 2-year story here to some degree. I also think a strategy on the split vote, kind of what the administrator's recommendation is on the split vote, what the city is doing. I haven't really heard anything about what's going on at the city level.
They have a surplus.
Well, I've heard that, but does that mean our effective tax rate will go down because of that surplus?
Well, again, I
Question.
no, you're not, go ahead, I'll meet.
Yeah, so the city, what's the city doing is another one. And then I think you've articulated this in terms of the impact, but as I think about telling the story, it's really the cost of stopping and starting things. And you know, you've articulated that if you eliminate some teaching positions, you have this downstream effect of seniority rules. If you defer maintenance, you know, you have the cost. If you defer paying off a deficit, you have, you know, there's a cost to stopping and starting. And I think you're articulating it in terms of kind of the cost of continuing or continuity. But I think, Martin, you've said it well. I think a push down is really what we're looking for.
Are you saying even in school there was no free lunch?
Exactly.
I think you're right. Well, I feel like I have some good guidance with, I think it's also imperative for me to tell you that, you know, it's likely I'm gonna need to push some things to you between now and, you know, our next meeting.
Well, yeah, I'm just gonna
so-
ask, so I think it would be really hard for us to make a decision next week without
Having some
push down stuff
Yeah.
beforehand. I mean, I would, myself, I'd like to look at the push down
Sure.
scenario before the
Agreed.
meeting and be able to digest it a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's a major focus for what remains the rest of this week and you know, the first part of, you know, the couple of days of next week. So, I'm committed to try to get you that information and provide you with what I think, you know, answers what I'm hearing is factoring into the, you know, the more of the approved budget scenario that you'll be approving. So,
I will not be in the state next week. I'm gonna try and make arrangements to Skype in, but I'll have to ask you, Elizabeth, to preside. I don't think it's hopes to be effective to preside from the distance. I don't think that will work. Thank you, I guess. That takes us to setting the agenda for our next meeting. I gotta think, I know what the agenda for our next meeting is.
So is the January 9th a regular meeting, or is it
No.
just budget?
well,
I
it
guess
was,
I was a little confused by,
Yeah, because there is a regular agenda. We have like
don't we?
shouldn't it be just the
well,
budget?
we've typically done
Some other stuff.
other stuff on it. So, although we try to keep it light, I know I'm getting honest on this, but which is not a good. Yeah, David, really? Well, I didn't put anything under my report.
Really, David?
Yeah. But there's some things that have been out here, looming, the harassment, the D6 piece, we could, we're still waiting to get some legal information back on that one still. Is that right, Wayne?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I don't believe these are major. I think the public hearing on, on the budget is the biggest by far, and majority of the time needed. So,
Do we have anything in the other paper extra about the hearings, the budget hearings?
we ran, in the last edition, we had a insert,
Okay.
and there is one that's out tomorrow, which will be, I think we repeat the same insert. I'm not positive about that, but I think we're repeating the same insert, with the dates out there.
Okay. Are there any other changes suggested for our January 9th meeting agenda? Hearing none. Any additions or deletions to our future agenda items list?
Just like to get through them.
Yeah. That takes us to the minutes of our December 17 meeting. Are there any proposed changes or amendments to the December 17 minutes? Hearing none, if there's no objection, they'll be approved. No objection, they're approved. Takes us to our December 19 minutes. Any changes or corrections proposed to the December 19 minutes? Hearing none. Without objection, they're approved. There's no objection, they're approved. That takes us to accounts payable order action. Approval.
Oh, yes. So, your resolution is attached in here, and, we have been trying to be diligent about following the resolution, and under, if you look on the resolution, it does have under the limitations that I have. And so it's in 1, 2, and 3, which basically states, I can't enter into, amounts for construction that would exceed $50,000, $50,000 exceed for equipment or for tuition or contracted services. So this is why it's in front of you as an approval under the resolution. That's what gets called out. And so that, I don't think we've been very consistently clear with you about this. And I think it's created some confusion for you in the past without revisiting, and perhaps you have still some confusion about your own resolution and would like re-clarification.
Well,
So-
Awesome.
I think someone will need to help me understand, but my current understanding is that these are expenses that have already been approved. They're in the budget, but they're being highlighted because they exceed a certain amount. We also have a policy about new expenses that go beyond $50,000.
Right.
That's a separate thing than this.
Can't enter into an agreement.
Right, a new
Right, a
expense.
new agreement.
These are already
Correct.
agreed upon expenses.
Right.
Okay.
But if you look at the policy, it essentially says you don't pay it, even though it's
Part of the budget.
budgeted and we're obligated to do it, that the superintendent doesn't pay it without our prior approval.
That's correct.
And that's in our policies?
I'm looking at the
Or-
policy, which is attached. It says the superintendent
That's the
shall.
resolution, that's not our policy, right? Don't we have in our
Well,
policies?
Well, under policy governance is where you say
Right.
can't enter into, agreements,
Right.
with contracts that exceed, right? Those are things. This is specific to, my action in regards to these particular areas of construction, equipment, tuition or contracted services for things that are within the budget. It's basically calling these things out, even though they're approved, but since they're larger dollar items, the board wanted to see them
Right.
and again, just pay attention to them, which is
But they're not new
appropriate.
expenses.
But remember, if you say no, then they don't get paid, even though in some cases the services have been rendered. So it enters into the same issue that you've had in the past with this whole process, is that, we're kind of, we're in an awkward place.
It's true, but, I think the point of it really is informational. So, we could, for example, respond to this particular order by saying, well, that commitment was made, and if we don't prove it, we'll get sued, and then we'll have to pay it anyway, so we're gonna pay it. Or we're gonna do things different now. I'm not saying we should, but we have the option, if we were to look at this expense and say, I don't want this anymore, to say, David,
Right.
don't do that anymore.
Right, I think that's kind of the way I viewed it from your perspective, was that, these expenses, that are within the budget, it rises to the level of concern where I think you should be reevaluating this contract, or this tuition, or this equipment purchase, or
Or
whatever.
this relationship
That's
that
right.
causes these expenses. to
Versus
occur.
not necessarily not paying it, but because it's such a large amount. I mean,
And, I suppose there could be instances in which, in theory, we might say, no, we're not gonna pay it, We might look at the particular expense and say, we don't think we are legally obligated to pay it. The superintendent recommended it, but we don't agree with it.
Even if it's a contractual service? That
Well,
we've signed a contract with an agency to provide a service, and you get a bill and it's time to pay it, and why would we not, and the service was rendered, why would the board
well, if you
not
go
pay
far
it?
enough filling in the details, you get to a point where you don't really have any choice. But you might envision a situation in which there's a contract, and the contract says that the price for the services is what's reasonable. And the bill comes in at $56,000, and you say, well, that's not reasonable. We're not gonna pay it. And then there might have to be a fight about whether, you're actually obligated to pay it. But at least you have that choice if the matter has to come to your attention before it's paid. Now, of course, before this, we had that choice with every $3.27 expenditure as well. This is just a matter of saying, at this level of expenditure, we're gonna do it this way. I think that's where we
Yep.
are.
So relative to this particular invoice, these expenses were in the budget and are in line with what the contract provided for?
correct.
Is there a motion to approve this accounts payable order?
Is it an action
I-
item?
It is.
Yes.
I make the motion that we approve payment of this contract item.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? You have approved this item. The other accounts payable items are not action items. Are there some announcements?
Yes. At your place, I think you do have the schedule, again, the upcoming dates. I know it's been complicated, and I have probably not helped with some of the confusion, but trying to keep ahead of some of the dates that are coming. Also, just some general announcements. Obviously, January 21st is MLK, Martin Luther King Day. There's no school. We've got a late start at the high school, middle school coming up on the 23rd. Again, a little bit of some art and some outcome, little color to your announcements today is some wonderful work done by the students at Chamberlain on a snowflake project that they did before the break. Tickets about Miracle Worker are coming up. That's January 11th and 12th. At 7 o'clock. Again, if you're interested in that, please let me know. I'm happy to sign you up. PACT is going to have a dinner, their birthday celebration on January 8th. Again, if you're invited to come to that, if you'd like. Again, I think you can just show up, but if you'd like me to make sure you have a spot, or Susie knows you're coming, I'd be happy to make sure that happens. And then with sadness, this last portion, we did have a death of a former student on January 23rd, and just wanted to some condolences to the family and friends, and also our teachers who've gotten to know him well. And again, our heart goes out to the family and friends for that, and I just wanted to make you aware of that. And lastly, I wanted to just let you know that Judy Kearns from the other paper had asked me to just follow up with a thing on the school safety for the other paper, and I wasn't exactly sure when that was going to air, but I'm hearing it's going to air tomorrow, so I'll pass these around. Actually, I don't think you have these at your place. And I don't know exactly what format it will show up tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know that they're out there. So again, I don't remember what I actually had written now, but just some information on school safety and our response as a district from my perspective. So
Okay.
that is.
Any other announcements? Oh, I'm sorry, David.
That's all I have.
Okay. Diane?
Yes, the chorus concert, middle school
Yes.
and high school.
Sunday.
Chorus concert Sunday afternoon at
Thank you.
the high school auditorium. It's a combined middle school, high school. I think it's at 2:30.
I think you're right, and it is on the sign on the corner of, the Dorset and Kennedy Road to it. That is posted there. I think you're right. It's Sunday, 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Okay, that takes us to self-monitoring data. So we'll take a moment to fill out our forms.
So, I'll have to figure out some times. What do you got the rest of this week?
Budget, anything to do.
You're around. You're not you're not out of office. I'll work on sending some different emails to Patrick. And just, if this was to be what would have been effective this year, kind of thing.
Okay.
And then have a pretty good idea where we can go, I think. So.
Hold on.
Quick review on our self-monitoring, on our board meeting evaluation. It's agree across the board with one disagree on board members arriving on time.
Comes from the late member.
And on our policy, it's agree across the board with 2 disagrees on number 1, neglecting to submit monitoring data required by the board in a timely, accurate, and understandable fashion, directly addressing the provisions of board policies being monitored. And 1 disagree on number 6, present information in unnecessarily complex or lengthy form or in a form that fails to differentiate among information of 3 types: monitoring, decision prep, and incidental. So these
All right.
will go on record.
Thank you. With that, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.